The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good evening, everybody. Sorry for that. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to lecture number 22. This one will be about 3 more contraction and one other deal. The coronet contraction, the unilateral and bilateral contraction, and the over-diverging hoof. This is the last of our contraction block. We will next time go to something else, club foot, coon foot, and extensor bearing foot, which should be interesting as well, but let's just wrap this up today. It's a little intense, it's a little difficult. It's difficult to explain, no question about it. And let me try to make the best out of it. Coronet contraction. In a hoof with this contraction, the walls seen from the sole are no longer curved but straight. Viewed from the front, the wall looks narrow and high. The diameter below the coronet is the same or less than at the coronet. So here it is less than at the coronet. And the same here in the drawing. The wall seems to be bound in below the coronet. So, and the walls in these feet are very, very straight, all the way to the back. This here is a hoof with a swollen coronet, often but not always in connection with coronet contraction. That doesn't mean when it's swollen you have coronet contraction, but it often happens in that combination. It's just that everything down here is so constricted that any little upset makes the swell up because there's just not enough circulation coming all around. Let's look at the movement that the hoof makes with coronet contraction at the coronet band. This is not at the bottom of the foot, this is at the coronet band. And this is what precipitates this. This here on the right side, this one here, is a normal situation at the coronet band. The green line is when the hoof is not weight-bearing, and the red line, if you think way back when we talked hoof mechanism, I had a slide there that showed how the hoof dips in on the top at the coronet band a little bit during weight-bearing. That is here where you see the coronet band sliding back from the non-weight-bearing position when it becomes weight-bearing. And it also comes then at the coronet out here, kind of sort of behind the widest point of the hoof. That part moves more out on weight-bearing in a healthy foot. In a foot with coronet contraction, the hoof does not move, it still moves a little bit back here. That doesn't go away. But here in the back, it doesn't move out, it moves just back. And every time that this happens, that the hoof moves upon weight bearing a little bit back, it pulls those walls on the side straighter, and it brings this whole hoof more out of its original balance. And this is really difficult for the horse to handle, because this leads here where the coffin bone sits in the middle with the palmar processes to destruction of the coffin bone from all the pressure that is on there over time, and not over 2 weeks but over a couple of years. This situation deteriorates. In the next slide we have the same situation, just with the hoof capsule drawn in. So that may make it a little bit more obvious what is happening in coronet contraction. Again, the healthy hoof is here on the right, and the not healthy hoof, the hoof with the coronet contraction, is on the left. The hoof, as it becomes weight-bearing, expands to the back but not to the side at all. And that will pull those walls ever straighter till you have a very oblong hoof that has very straight walls. So the question is, how does coronet contraction happen? First of all, shoeing. High heels and excessively long hoofs contribute to coronet contraction. The combination of all three of those, shoes, high heels, and long hoofs, contribute to coronet contraction even easier. And you see this here in this short horse on top. On the bottom you see a horse that was mine, and he came with kind of this contraction, and here you have a fairly classical coronet contraction, and we will see this hoof again when we talk later about unilateral and bilateral contraction. This hoof is going to be around for a while. It has caused me headaches for 8 years, and what we see here, just to mention it, is an abscess hole that is growing down from the original point where the abscess came out, and it will migrate down here till it is finally to the very end. Not a big deal, but this contraction is a big deal, and this horse had a multitude of problems. We'll see about this again. Here on the left we have again kind of the forces that happen in a hoof with coronet contraction. You have also usually underslung heels. So when the horse steps on this pushes forward. The already oblong hoof form pulls back, and this whole form will get longer and longer over time. So how are we going to trim for this? And I have to put this disclaimer in here again. It is really difficult to explain how to trim over the internet. It's almost impossible. So without practical instruction, this should be construed only as theory. If there are so many components in a hoof that if you think, oh, I see that my horse has this and this is what I have to do now, this may not be the first action, because something else may come into play as well. And this is where I can only emphasize how important it is that if you get any education, that it really is a thorough one, that when you run into these problems that you know what to do first and what not to do. Because, and we see this when we talk about unilateral contraction beyond the vertical, we see how important this is to exactly know what to do first, because you can collapse a hoof in no time. These hoofs with coronet contraction often come with very high bars that are levered high up into the hoof capsule. So you have to take care of those bars as well. And you may have to trim them a little bit below where you're usually trimming them. You may have to over-shorten the bars a little bit just to give this horse a real good resting point. Then you have to set the heel points back when this hoof is underslung. And you have to bring that hairline to a 30 degree. Once you have the hairline at a 30 degree, then the horse will put the correct pressure onto the hoof capsule, and when he puts that correct pressure onto the hoof capsule, he will over time bring this whole hoof back into balance. And you just have to watch that you keep the breakover really back, that you keep that toe short enough that the horse does not have an extended period of time on the hoof, that he can break over early enough. You have to keep the bars down, the heels back, and deal with this underslung heel situation at the same time. So this is a lot of things to take care of. And then you have to have, and this is maybe the hardest of all, you have to have patience. I hear this a lot recently, that people email me and say, I am fighting this situation, it seems forever, and it doesn't get any better. Well, if nothing gets any better, in most cases, there's something wrong with your trim. Because whenever I see well-trimmed hoofs, something changes for the better. There are some cases, and I'm going to show you one of them, where it really doesn't get better. And then you have to ask yourself, what is the underlying cause for this? Why is this not getting better? Maybe there's not enough bone substance. It is always good in such a case to get radiographs to help you with this decision. If you are constantly agonizing over the hoof form, and this goes on for a year or two, then get some radiographs and evaluate the situation of the bone structure that determines the hoof capsule. If you have a coronet contraction like this, and this has been in place for many, many years, and the coffin bone has narrowed itself, what is the hoof wall going to grow on? You need to actually create some artificial tension on the hoof wall in order to pull that hoof wall back out. And that is not an easy thing. And you have to be very careful about this so that the horse doesn't get sore. If you work on this too aggressively, the horse will get sore, and the sore horse doesn't move. And without movement, there is no improvement. So you have to keep the horse sound enough to move, yet you have to constantly do a little bit something that there is a change. That means every time you walk up to a horse that you're trimming, you have to really assess the situation with a whole new eye, with notes in hand if it has to be, making lots of pictures, and again and again reassessing the situation and saying, what else can I do here if A, B, and C haven't worked? So if nothing works, there is another way out, and that is to ask somebody else and get as much input as you possibly can. The Yahoo group may be a good place for that. And I would like to encourage everyone who is trimming professionally and is on these calls and on the Yahoo group to help out the ones who are doing this far away in a different country all by themselves, and help them out as good as you can. Give them some tips. Mark up some pictures. Try a little bit. I have learned to become a lot better trimmer when I started teaching. And I started to look at hoofs with a different eye, with the eye of the student, with the eye of somebody who says, now what? And how would I explain this to somebody who doesn't know what to do? And then you really get a better grip on this. So this would be a valuable exercise. Patience is the main thing for coronet contraction. It is a very long rehabilitation contraction. So here we have such a hoof, and it was the only one that I have seen since I'm trimming since 2001. So 9 years now, 9+ years. And this is the only one I had ever encountered that was this severe. On the left side before trimming, on the right side after trimming. Unfortunately, I do not have frontal pictures of this hoof, nor do I have lateral pictures. So those were the days. This hoof I think I did around 2003 when I was a student. Took the heel points definitely a good bit more back. They are now much farther back. And didn't shorten the toe any more than not even to the white line. This is a horse that's just around the corner from where I live, and could be rasped back every week. I also asked the owner to do this, to help a little bit out with this, and to facilitate a shorter hoof altogether that would eventually actually end up somewhere here. That much is too much. But if you elect to take, you can easily take this much off, but then you're also risking that you're losing toe height, that your weight-bearing points are not here anymore, and you have just trimmed them off. So careful with this rasping through the white line. That could potentially backfire on you as well. If it's not one thing, it's another. Again, this takes a long, long time. Enough about coronet contraction. Let's talk about unilateral contraction beyond the vertical, also known in short as ULCBV. But I have a harder time to say ULCBV than unilateral contraction beyond the vertical. We usually refer to this just as unilateral contraction. It means that the hoof is contracted just on one side. Not all contractions happen symmetrical. This one happens asymmetrical. The wall is pushed beyond the vertical on one side, like in this hoof, and in this hoof as well. And I promised you would see. This is our coronet contraction hoof from earlier, and it also had, at the very end, unilateral contraction beyond the vertical, more on the bottom than on the top. That is just to show you what is possible there, and it can be worse. And this here is one of those worse scenarios. This is a hoof. Unfortunately, when I made the photographs, I was 2 hours away from home. When I brought them home, it was too late. They were before pictures anyway. So once you have trimmed them, they don't look the same anymore. And but here, I never had something like this again. This is why I left the fuzzy picture in. It's this much contracted inside the vertical. And every time this horse steps on this, this is pushed even more in. This is a really lousy situation. What you see at the same time is how high this wall here is. And when you think about this and turn this around, this whole situation, then you can understand that with this high wall, the hoof gets actually thrown totally onto the side, which makes the situation even worse. So, 1.5 years forward, and we came to this. This same hoof, same horse. Much better widening in the heels, better frog widening, still lots of bruising here and here. This is all bruising. This is really, there was always bruising in this hoof. There was so much wrong, and she didn't have radiographs and wouldn't do any, not happening. So, but with careful trimming, at least this wall came straight. Now it is straight. Now the next step would be to bring it outside the vertical. And these hoofs happen. This inside the vertical is usually a trimming mistake, leaving the hoof out of balance for a long time. There's no question about it that this hoof was left out of balance for a long time. And the other possibility would be injuries, that the horse is just not weighing the hoof right for a long time. But it is a long time in the making. This doesn't happen overnight. So when we have this unilateral contraction beyond the vertical, it could very well happen that the can you not hear me anymore? Did I lose the... Oh. I have to find the right cable. Sorry. Oh, okay. You can hear me. Thank you for that, Shira. Let me just plug my headphone back in. Good. Thank you. It just looked on my screen as if I had no audio. So what happens in these hoofs that are for a long time inside the vertical, they also lose the bone to support the hoof capsule to be outside. You see here the bone is diverging, but on this side it is not. And here we have a close-up of the situation, and you can see how this hoof wall is just coming in. And the same thing is here. This is very upright, while the other side is diverging. These are both bones of unilateral contraction beyond the vertical. So these things happen, and then you have the question, how much can I get this hoof to diverge again without the support of the bone structure underneath? And that means that if you have a hoof capsule here, let's say you have it here, the hoof capsule, you have to put a lot of tension on that hoof capsule going this way in order to bring this hoof outside this bone outside the vertical again. And that means tension and movement, because without movement you don't get any tension. And it also means to trim this hoof wall, like this, at a solar slant. And you have to be very careful how you trim, how much you trim this at a solar slant, because it has to go a little bit deeper. So, because if you have this here and you put a lot of slant on, you might just put a lot of tension on that wall, and that will produce pain. And as we know, a horse in pain doesn't move. So again, you have to be careful, and you have to monitor this, and you have to, I would make a lot of pictures and just constantly look at it, and don't forget that it takes about 2 months before you see a change. So that is somewhere around, in a horse like this, you have to stay on top of this. You cannot trim something like this only every 6 weeks. Again, the minimum is 4 weeks. I would trim this every 2 weeks and just redo the slant on the hoof wall. And this is what we're talking about in this picture. This solar slant means that you trim the hoof wall in such a way that you follow the concavity of the sole through the wall, but you may want to do a little bit less, so you don't have quite such an impact in the beginning. And then the ground will grab onto the slant and actually push it out this way. And that is how you get this hopefully out. At the same time, where you trim this out this way, you try to lower the opposite wall as far as you can, as far as you dare, so that you get a little relief on this undercrushed wall. Remember when we talked about trimming underslung heels, how I said if you have enough toe height, lower the toe a little bit so that the heel gets some relief and can come out over time. Not all at once, but over time it will help. But you have to have enough toe height. Now on this one you have to have enough height here on that wall. That means that opposite wall needs to be higher, like it was in the hoof in that extreme contraction that I showed you. We had more wall on the opposite side. If this contraction here is in the very back of the hoof, towards the heel, and this is where it often happens, then you have to lower the diagonal toe so that you have the relief of the heel. If the right heel is undercrushed, you need to lower the left toe, if you have enough toe height. If you don't have enough toe height, you only can deal with this slanted wall trim. Then you just don't have enough hoof to work with. And these are very difficult situations. This is a difficult situation altogether, no question about it. So in order to get this out, you have to tilt the hoof in the other direction so that this whole hoof, you can see how it is even in the drawing it's hanging out to the right. You want to get this over there. And when you have that, then this wall here gets some relief and can from up here, from the very top, grow in slightly straighter. And when that has grown in slightly straighter, then we build the next time, or with every trim, we're going to try to build a little bit more on this. And it will come a little more out, and then it will come a little more out. And with diligence and patience, you will get there over time. It takes a long time, and these horses know they are not happy. But it's that, or nothing. There's really not a choice. So here we have such a horse that has very uneven feet and came inside the vertical. The picture doesn't quite show it enough, but this is really inside the vertical here. And you can see a little bit how this has improved. This was a long time in the making, but it is a little bit better here. And then at the very end, it's still inside the vertical because the hoof grows from here. And this here has relaxed a little bit compared to the time before. And the other side is very much out. But if you also look at the way this is trimmed, I took the whole wall here down and the toe as much as I dared. This horse does not have excessive toe height, so you can only do so much, but I didn't trim anything here. To leave as much as possible here and take as much as possible down here. And here we have the same horse. This is again the horse from the front picture of unilateral contraction beyond the vertical. And over time, the pictures are not all taken evenly well from behind. These three are, but this one is not. So over time, the situation starts now to get a little bit better. This is a 19 or meanwhile 20-year-old horse that had most likely this situation for most of his life. This here is lateral cartilage, pushed all the way over here. It doesn't belong here. It would belong somewhere here. So this is a really difficult situation, but the question was, when he came with this situation, he was lame. So what are you going to do? Keep him lame? Keep the shoes on? That wasn't an option. So it is now 1.5 years later, not quite, 1 year, 3 months, after we took the shoes off, and the horse is home and is ridden every day and is sound, which I find astonishing with these feet, but he feels definitely a whole lot better, and he gets trimmed every 4 weeks. And this is not the last picture. This is the last picture I had, but by the time that the September course rolls around to these pictures, I hopefully have from my colleague Pia new pictures. She's trimming the horse now. So this is just the situation where, again, you see how much this hoof leans onto the side that is contracted inside the vertical, and you need to constantly work to get this hoof over here and keep him pushed out. And keep a little bit of tension on that wall so you urge it to come out this way, all the while tipping this to the opposite side. Last time, when we talked about sheared heels, I told you that there is a situation where you cannot lower the wall on the sheared heel or the heel on the sheared heel. And this is the situation where you have the high side beyond the vertical or on the vertical. If you lower this, this is going to collapse inside, without a question, every time. So when you have the higher side being inside the vertical or on the vertical, you really cannot do anything to that high side. You cannot take this down. You need first to get that wall out. Getting this wall to move out is your #1 priority before you do anything else. This is the same like with the underslung heel. Getting that underslung heel out is your number one priority. Because if you don't do this, you will only undersling the heel more. If you do not observe this, that this horse has a sheared heel but has also a wall on the vertical or inside the vertical, and you lower this to balance this out, you will bring this wall more inside the vertical, and this is a huge mistake. And the horse will have to suffer the consequences. Because this side, this wall, this heel will collapse inside. And don't forget, they are moving most of the day around on these feet, so this is a significant impact. And again, on a hoof like this, even with a sheared heel, with a higher heel here, you still have to tip this onto the side. If you don't do this, you don't get enough relief on the wall here to bring this out. Then, when it is out after 6 months, 12 months, then you can lower that heel. And good luck to you. Again, these are corrections that I do not suggest to be made without professional help. This is really difficult. This is really something where holding the knife at the wrong angle can get you into deep trouble. And to understand all of this and get all of this in good sequence is really a big job. But this is why we also offer the professional course. So can't emphasize this enough. This is not a trim for an amateur, but it may help those of you who have horses and do not trim themselves to recognize situations and then at least remember that this is difficult to repair and that you have to find somebody who knows how to do this and who is very careful with the situation and not afraid to hang in there for a long time. That brings us to the even uglier situation, and that is bilateral contraction beyond the vertical. Causes for this bilateral contraction, where both sides are inside the vertical, are usually soft terrain that cannot supply sufficient force for the hoofs of hard-hoofed horses or foals to spread. This is what happens when you raise hard-hoofed horses in stalls. When they don't get enough movement, when they are not out on hard ground running around 24/7, except when they sleep, but where they really get the bottom of the hoof stimulated. Let's look at a normal situation. What would happen normally is that the hoof is diverging like this as it grows, and in a bilateral contraction it is inverted on both sides. And this is really difficult, and just to say it for those who have been through the same program that I have been through, we have been taught a method to trim this that was during the teaching time very confusing, and we have at Equine Soundness gotten away from this. Relieving the quarters totally, because it collapses the foot in adult horses and doesn't make any difference because they are not weighing that area. So we do now something different, and either it works or it doesn't. But if that doesn't work, the other method that caused us so much headaches by learning it doesn't help either. What we see here is the same hoof. Remember the one with the coronet contraction? And then we had the unilateral contraction beyond the vertical here. And this is where we started out in 2002 with bilateral contraction beyond the vertical. And I tried with this horse everything that I have learned and everything that I thought may work. And in 8 years, I got only to, when I started to trim him instead of for bilateral contraction, I started to trim him for unilateral contraction. Tipped him on this side, and no, actually I tipped him on this side, and this side grew out, but I could never get this side straight. This was just not happening. This was coming a lot better here, as you can see. This is better than it was here, but then on the very bottom it always turned in. And beginning of July this year, he did not feel good on this anymore, and we finally quit trying and we put him down. So this horse was 8 years with us, and I couldn't get him right. He was not miserable. He made everybody else miserable at times. He was the absolute patriarch of this herd, of this little herd we have. But he was getting around quite nicely, and but I could not get this hoof to widen the way I wanted it to, and that made us both sorry. So, but just to show you this again, you can get from here to here if you give it enough time and you really keep on trying. To trim for bilateral contraction beyond the vertical, what we do is we just put a solar slant on the wall again and hope that the ground is sufficient enough to push this out. And then you again shorten the breakover really, really well so that the horse does not spend a whole lot of time on these walls, that he always breaks over rather quickly. And hopefully that helps. Hoof capsules do change. Bones do change. So you have, even joints change. You have a chance that you get something done. And what's the choice? Giving up is not a choice. So as long as the horse gets around well, you have to keep trying, provided he gets around well. That's always important to remember. So much about unilateral and bilateral contraction beyond the vertical. And the next thing that we're getting to is something that's not a contraction, but it is a situation that most schools would name flares. We think of this mainly as an over-diverging hoof. And there is no place in this whole seminar or in the school to stick it anywhere else but behind contractions. I don't know where else to put it. It really is the opposite of the contraction. The hoof actually with every step gets wider, and you have to do something about it. But before we talk about what to do about it, let's talk about what we see in this hoof in general. The first thing that I see is that he has up here a inflamed coronet and an inflamed periopal. When you look real close, this is a little pink, and this has these little telltale holes, and it also has periopal growing all the way to here in this rather thick manner. And when you have this, you have inflammation in the periopal. Now, I'm not really concerned about this. This happens at times when there is a lot of moisture, when there is a little bit of change in feed, this is an area that inflames easily. And all that happens then is the periopal all of a sudden grows down a lot and kind of proliferates. I wouldn't fret over this, but I want to point it out to you so you can see it. The next thing we have is here an abscess hole, and that was 2-3 months ago up here, and then it grows down. And this is another thing where you really don't have to worry too much about. You also see quite some cracks, and before this picture was made, I had this horse at my place and was working with him for a little while, but not for long. This was a financially very challenged horse owner, so but these cracks were now growing out. I believe he blew the abscess while he was at my place. And you see that he has up here a much better connection. And usually when abscesses get resolved, everything that grows anew is better in general. And then everything that's here has no connection to the coffin bone, and it really is worthless. And the only thing that you can do on such a hoof in order to get this, the cracks come from high heels that were there already. And this was a particularly weak area to begin with. So what you can do is this, and this is not the only thing, but this is the first thing to do, and this is to put a really strong bevel on this wall. A bevel that leaves just enough wall here to leave this wall in contact with the ground. But everything else has to kind of go and be rounded off. These lines should really be round. They're hard to draw. So that is the one thing. And in this particular case, one of the contractions that we talked about comes really in handy, and that is sole contraction. In a hoof like that, till it has grown out from the top to the very end, you want to not touch the sole and keep as much sole in as possible. Not till it touches the ground totally, but really keep a little bit more sole in, because this helps you keep the walls in. If you have a thick sole here, it doesn't allow the wall to spread, and that keeps the whole hoof a little bit more together. And you get a better connection from the top, and therefore you can grow this out. And once this has grown out to the bottom in the right way, in a correct way, and this horse was one that she took hunting, and I bet you that people that saw her hunting barefoot later on said, "Oh yeah, your horse just has good feet." And the hoof that you saw is certainly not one with good feet. You may have, in a hoof like this, that is also very flat at the same time, a bone structure that looks like that. That is the coffin bone of a long-term over-diverging hoof. And there was so much tension here on the hoof wall, because that always pulled this way, that it actually laid on bone. But at the same time it was sinking because it wasn't holding on, and that eroded the bottom of the coffin bone, and it became very flat in its concavity. There is virtually no concavity. So that may be an added stumbling stone that you have to fight with, but we have talked about how easy it is to change bone through pressure, and if you get this a little bit more narrowed in, you may actually regain some concavity again, just by getting a better attachment all around. So Lots of extension marks today, hopefully in my speech, telling you to be careful, telling you to get good help with these things, get more education. This is not, I cannot talk to you in 1 hour about 4 different hoof situations and give them all justice to the extent they need to have justice. They need to be given justice. But it will give you a better eye to recognize things, to recognize contractions, and to also hopefully have red flags flying up that say, hello, get some help if this happens. So that was it for tonight. I would like to invite your questions and let's talk about it if there are any. One would certainly think that in such a complicated issue, the one or the other would have a question. On slide 14, where the heel's 3 centimeter, they look lower. Okay, let's go back to, that was Capri. Let's go back to slide 13, because I have to see it in order. They are well 3 centimeters. What makes you say that they look lower? Okay, 14. There's still 3 centimeters from here to here. You know, this is not a lateral. We measure this in profile. If you measure this here, but you can't see that area in the profile. You have to measure this here, and you have plenty here. That's what you see in the profile. I have some profile pictures somewhere. If I wanted to, I could prove it to you. But because I can prove it to you, you can just believe it. Will you? Thank you. Thank you, Capri. Yeah, they are definitely high enough. On this horse, by no means would I take them lower, because that would crush everything under. This would really be fatal. Yes, Shira.
I actually thank you, because I think you may have helped solve a puzzle for me with my thoroughbred that I've been having for the last way too many years about his feet. And when you said, don't touch the sole with these over-diverging hooves, it was like, oh, of course.
Yeah.
What's interesting for RJ, and I was going to ask you about this anyway, is he develops bumps in his sole near the tip of the frog, right before the tip of the frog, kind of right next to them. And I don't know, in like June or July, I was just like, okay, I got to deal with these bumps, and I took them down, and that was a huge mistake, because he was incredibly sore after that, and I felt horrible. And I kind of did some benign neglect over the last 6 weeks, just because he was in one state and I was in another. I got him back. I've never seen his feet with so much growth in them, ever. And he's completely sound. His feet look horrible, but he's completely sound, and he's one that, I called his feet dinner plates. They were completely flared, completely flat. He actually has some concavity now. After, 6-8 weeks of my not touching him, because I couldn't. And his soles are so bumpy that I was looking at them going, oh my God, what do I do? And now I know I don't do anything. I leave them alone.
Right. There's... And that is what I tried to say earlier. It's not difficult to learn to trim. I can write this down in a handbook with 30 pages. How to trim. this is how you do the wall, this is how you do the bar, few diagrams with it, end of story. But what to do when this situation is there, when you have an over-diverging hoof, you may have to leave the sole in. You may have to leave the sole in. And there are times when you may have to trim it out.
Right.
You know, and you have to decide, that's where experience comes in. The more horses you trim, the more you learn this. And you're not the only one who makes mistakes. You know?
No, not at all. And this horse has taught me more about everything, not just trimming.
That's what they do. That's what they are around for. You know, if you have trouble catching your horse for 5 years in the pasture, you may wake up one morning and say, I have to change something. And that's the point where you learn something.
Right, and I had looked at his hooves in June and said, I have to do something. I mean, he's still not completely sound. I don't know what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And that was what I changed, but it was the wrong thing to change.
Yeah, well, you know, but
But you live and you learn. You live and you learn with it.
Fortunately, if you don't do something that totally mutilates him, he will grow out of the pain and he won't hold this against you.
No,
So,
not at all.
so yeah, I'm glad if only one every 6 weeks gets something out of this course, then that's a good thing. And we'll get together, Shira, in a few days and get serious about all of this.
And I had another question. I don't
Yes.
know if you have pictures of it, though. Do you have any pictures where you can point out the coffin bone loss through x-rays so we can see what that would look like in an x-ray?
Yes. If it has to be soon, I can send them to you. We are getting to this within 2-3 lectures.
Okay, thank you. No, it wasn't that I needed to see it soon. I was just, as you were saying it, and you were showing the coffin bone,
Yeah.
I was wondering what those Palmer processes would look like on an x-ray.
Oh, with the contraction, no, I actually don't have any x-rays of coronet contraction. This is just something that makes good sense. You know, you can't have an oblong hoof like this and not have a bone change.
Okay.
Not happening.
And on the other, where you saw the unilateral and bilateral contraction and the way it affected the coffin bone, on the, sorry, I just lost my vocabulary, the wings of the coffin bone?
On the Palmer processes? Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So you don't have any, so I'm thinking the right thing. So as the unilateral and bilateral contraction, the coffin bones, you could see it very clearly, and I was just wondering how one would see that in an x-ray.
You would see this in a X-ray that is made the right way, that is made from the back. You should see it.
Okay.
But it has to be significant, and it has to be a digital X-ray. You do not see. I don't see how you could see this in a regular radiograph.
Would you ever be able to see the remodeling of the coffin bone that makes it more flat in an x-ray?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. That's an easy one. That's an AP, anterior posterior, from the front to the back, and you see how flat these coffin bones are.
Great, thank you.
Okay?
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Anybody else? Going once? Going twice? Yes, Rosemary.
Hi, have you ever dealt with a horse that has had sheared heels and behind the vertical in both front feet?
Mm-hmm. This one here.
Oh, this one was in both feet?
Yeah.
And so you work on both of them at the same time, or
Yeah.
do you
No,
Okay.
absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, that's all I wanted to know. Thank you.
This horse was interesting. His right front, this is the left front, His right front looks much worse, but he was lame on the left front. The right front looks that it shudders you. But I don't think it helps a lot to show you constantly worst case scenarios. You need to recognize when it's just so borderline. That is more important than these. We get towards the very end, so in November and beginning of December, we're really getting into some bad cases when we talk about lost hoof capsules and stuff like that. That's ugly. But other than, in general, I don't believe that showing these totally mangled founder hoofs, that is not helpful. What you as a horse owner need to see are founder cases that are borderline. How do I recognize a founder without a radiograph that other people don't recognize? That's to me important. That's much more important than this gloating over, oh, look what I could do. These are very subtle changes everywhere here. And to recognize subtle changes and to recognize subtle pathologies that are not glaring. If a horse is missing half a hoof, you can see that. Anybody can see that. I don't need to show you that. But this little bit, this here, this little bit inside the vertical here. Obviously, somebody missed this for a long time. Or maybe they just didn't know what to do with it. And then it stays there. That's what I want you to see, and that's where I want to scroll your eye to. And as I said, in the professional course, we do way, way more of this. This is just what we can do in 30 hours versus about 300 hours. Yes. So you get 10 times as much in the professional course. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Rosemary. And if nobody else has a question, have a wonderful week. I hope your weather is as glorious as it is right here in South Carolina. The days are in the high 70s. The nights are in the 50s. Low humidity, which we don't have so often. And it's just wonderful. And I hope your weather is just the same. And I see you next week. Thank you for coming.